Chapter 301, Sensitivity. Doom. The ocean's surface rocked. Doom. A dull sound continuously echoed like a bass drum with a loose resonant head. Doom. Then came the blood. Silas ripped his way out of the mouth of the floating sperm whale, his body covered in muck. His nose twisted with disgust, and he immediately dove into the ocean waters, preferring the salty streets to whatever disgusting concoction this was. He reflected on the battle and realized something profound. These creatures were definitely powerful, but their mental didn't scale as fast as their physical, leaving them without flexibility in combat. Even if the sperm whale had over 400 strength, that was useless in the face of 550 defense. It had been completely outdone by just a single skill. But that also meant that at higher levels, when their mental, and intelligence especially, began to catch up, well, they'd be as shocking as the mage snail that Silas had met that day in the volcano portal. Silas plucked out the gene core of the sperm whale and used his rune mastery to extricate the ice poison from it, then tossed it into the madness key. He was about to leave the rest of the sperm whale behind when he shook his head. His madness key was enormous by now. Why leave such good food behind? He still hadn't forgotten that he wanted to find a convenient way to cook a lot of food, but while he had yet to find those means, taking on such good meat wouldn't be bad. The high physical of the sperm whale would definitely come with great nutrients. There were a lot of things that Silas knew that he had to take more seriously. Sleep, hydration, nutrition. They were all just as important as they had been on Earth before the summoning. He had to treat himself like a high-performance athlete, or else he would end up breaking his body down. The impurity sickness he had suffered was only just one aspect of that. Silas was about to reorient himself and continue on his way when he spotted something else. At first, he thought that he had run into yet another creature who needed to be taught a lesson. But then he saw it. The blood of the sperm whale was pooling around this place oddly. It was hard to tell with the waters churning so much and the dark clouds above, but Silas' sensitivity to ice poison and his visualization had picked it up. With narrowed eyes, Silas dove into the waters, trying to sharpen his focus and night vision, looking around in the dark waters. Odd, is it really the blood? Silas chose to follow it. Logically, he would think that the blood would spread out and dilute, especially with how agitated the waters were. But they ignored the currents and flowed along a completely different path. Silas followed silently and found himself sinking deeper into the ocean on a slow, declining path. Should I continue? After over 10 minutes had passed, Silas felt that it was too much of a danger for him to continue like this. If he dove too deep, let alone oxygen, he would have to worry about decompression sickness. Silas chose to do so, however, he slowed his decline. He could continue to sense the blood even outside the range of his visualization thanks to his ice poison affinity. Since the blood was tainted by his poison, he could keep tabs on it from at least 100 meters out. Time ticked by, and an entire hour later, Silas saw it before he even got close. It was a familiar glow, one that he recognized even more when it was in water. A dungeon. That was when it struck him. It wasn't the blood that was being attracted, but rather the ice poison attached to it specifically. Dungeons pulled all the ether in the surroundings toward itself. Usually, Silas wasn't very sensitive to this, but after he gained a strong ice poison affinity, he had become able to sense these slight changes. The warp door to the dungeon was just standing in free-flowing space, but what was odd was that while Silas could see the vague outline of the dungeon, he didn't see any beasts around it. Why was that? Is that really a dungeon? Or is it that it only recently formed and hasn't had time to call large numbers of creatures over? Silas immediately dismissed the second thought. After all, it had taken him over an hour just to get here. That was more than enough time, especially since he had run into 3 more battles just to make it on top of having to take breaks to the surface just to breathe. Luckily, he eventually learned how to form a bubble around himself with his ether, like an evolved ether skin. But that didn't work if he went too deep because the pressure would shatter it. Silas' expression changed. Wait. With a kick, Silas suddenly accelerated toward the dungeon, moving with pace. He had come to realize something after staring at it for a while. It, indeed, wasn't a dungeon after all. A dungeon would be far more aggressive with how it pulled ether. This was something different, and he felt that he had an idea as to what it was. When he got close enough, Silas realized that it wasn't a warp gate he was looking at, but rather a bluish tablet with a delicate glowing light. Den detected. Sperm whale den, FFF+. Level, 5. Spawn rate, 1. Mutation rate, 0.005. Would you like to begin den establishment challenge? Silas' brows raised. So this was how dens were created. It was only a level 5 den, but did that matter when it spawned one sperm whale a day? They would, presumably, be even more powerful than the first one that Silas had defeated today, and that was huge. Plus, there was a 1 in 200 chance of a mutation. He wasn't sure exactly what a mutation entailed, but his assumption was that it was a positive one that would likely form an even more powerful sperm whale. However, what was a den establishment challenge? Soon, Silas found out. It seemed that this den needed a few sacrifices to activate, and they had to come in sperm whales that were at least level 5. Or, more accurately, he needed 10 level 5 creatures of similar affinity and of FFF+ grade. Silas frowned. This wasn't a simple task at all. However, after a while, he chose to accept. Chapter 302, Quiz. Den Establishment Challenge accepted. Time allotted, 0 hours 23 minutes and 59 seconds. It seems that if I fail, the den will be destroyed. I wonder if all dens are established like this. Silas reached out and took the den. The moment he did, he felt a vague feeling tugging at him. The den was telling him where the nearest target was. Convenient. Silas wasn't confident in finding so many targets in the vast ocean. He had had several run-ins now, but only one of them was against a sperm whale. This would make things easier on him. If Kasari had survived this long, she could wait an extra day. Silas surfaced into churning waters. The storm above seemed to be getting only more violent, and there was an uncomfortable swirl in the clouds above that noted something more sinister was on the horizon. N-O-V-E-L-B-J-N.C, a hurricane in the middle of winter. Luckily, the chilliness affected him even less with his new ice poison affinity. With his high constitution stacked on top of that, he wasn't even shivering right now. Whether that would continue to be the case, though, only time would tell. With a push of his feet and a sparkle of ether, Silas pulled himself to the surface and set off again. The location was an odd world. It seemed to be a forest, but there was a waterfall descending from the skies. The distinct, ocean-like smell felt completely out of place, overwhelming the usual earthiness. The salted waters descended onto the rainforest below in droves. By this point, the tall trees had already begun to wilt, and there was a push of mass migration elsewhere as creatures were displaced. In the center of all of this, and seemingly unmoved, a system city stood tall. Such a heavily fortified city built onto such soft soil should have stood no chance. In a matter of a few years, it would sink and collapse under its own weight. The fact this already soft soil was only being softened further by the influx of water made the situation considerably more dangerous. However, life in the system city continued unhindered. In fact, many had taken shelter in this majestic city. There were humans moving in and out of it. Often, they would hardly glance at the waterfall in the skies as though they were used to it. Not only did they ignore it, but they would steer clear of it. From time to time, beasts as large as homes would flop around and end up landing on the forest floor. Luckily, these were oceanic creatures that were pretty helpless on land. So long as you didn't get close, and their intelligence wasn't high enough to cast powerful skills, they were relatively easy to deal with. Plus, it made the food in this region extraordinarily cheap despite the high quality. Suddenly, there was a dull but booming splash that came from the waterfall and a large whale fell down from above. Oh, there comes another one. They're already heading out. Several armed men appeared, rushing out of the open city gates. They were armored in a steel blue and looked almost majestic. Even if one checked their levels, it would be possible to see nothing but an array of question marks. It was like they were as powerful as they had to be. These were the city guards and they were responsible for keeping order. System cities didn't have a laundry list of rules, but they did have their own laws. There were the main staples, such as no killing and no stealing, but there were more complex bylaws related to residences and businesses alike. No matter the situation, if there was a dispute, the city guards would be likely to take action. It gave this otherwise chaotic world structure, and the various adventurers of the human race found these system cities and their rules to be invaluable. No matter what danger you were dealing with, it would be resolved in a system city. Plus, the city guards even had jurisdiction over a certain radius outside the city, allowing them to act if there was an active threat to those entering and exiting. This was precisely one such case. The city guards swiftly killed the whale, took the gene core, and left the meat behind. It was only then that merchants and businessmen alike scurried forward with their teams to divide up the rest of the spoils. No one seemed to react at all to the snatching of the gene core. After all, weren't the city guards the ones who killed it in the first place? Deep within the system city, a pivotal conversation was occurring. That should be enough. Pliny Gwiz. Level. Lysarius Gwiz. Level. Pliny took the gene core that had just been handed to him and passed it to Lysarius. The latter took it with a casual flair, then closed his eyes. In real time, Lysarius's aura began to plummet as the gene cores around him vanished. A long while later, Lysarius's eyes opened. Pliny looked plenty satisfied, but Lysarius couldn't hide his annoyance. I have to put on this damned human skin and now all my power is gone. I hope you're happy. Pliny chuckled, looking down at his younger cousin. This matter is important and you should take it as an opportunity. Now go. The den shouldn't be more than an hour or two away from the portal, go and get it. Lysarius shook his head and stood to his feet. A small little level 5 den isn't going to make or break anything. It's an FFF plus grade, Pliny said plainly. Lysarius frowned when he heard this. It seemed that he couldn't be so casual anymore. That was a game changer. After a while, he spoke. They were stupid enough to ignore the largest segment of their planet before, but I doubt they would do it again. You're right, it might be time for some more direct action. After saying this, Lysarius vanished. Pliny walked to a large, wide window that overlooked the city, his gaze focused on the distance. Castlemaine, he muttered. Chapter 303, Trust. Cassarai sat at her desk with furrowed brows. It indeed wasn't a coincidence that Castlemaine had plummeted out of the rankings. She could feel that she was being targeted, but it was hard to tell if it was by coincidence or not. The system city had appeared too close by, and on the one hand, that made it easy to pay adventurers to help them deal with some of their trouble. But on the other, it loosened the control they had over the resources in the region. Whether it was herself or her militiamen, their leveling speed had plummeted off a cliff. Not that it was very fast to begin with. As though that wasn't bad enough, the influx of salt water was making it impossible to grow anything, so she had to rely on the Nexus to buy food, further pressuring their coffers. Then, just today, she got a report that the well water was becoming too salinated to drink. Now, even water had to be purchased through the Nexus. Everything felt like one step forward for 10 back. Ray, dear. A familiar voice caused Cassarai to lift her head. The bags under her eyes told their own story, and hearing her mother should have made her feel a little better. But instead, she felt another wave of fatigue hit her. Yes, Mom, you can come in. A spry middle-aged woman walked in. She was quite short, only reaching her daughter's shoulders, so it was clear that Cassarai didn't receive her dominant genes from her mother. That credit was given to her father, who was almost 7 feet tall. Geraldine sighed when she saw her daughter's state. She was about to say something when Cassarai put a hand to her forehead. Please, no more apologies. It's killing me slowly. I would have cussed you out already if you weren't my mother. An amused chuckle came from Geraldine. She was used to her daughter's ways and had enough teenage angst memories in the bank to know that this was actually considered to be a more mature Cassarai. Ray, you need to let your father and I help you. Cassarai sighed. What can you help with? Geraldine paused, not quite sure how to answer this immediately. You're a marine biologist, Mom. There are no oceans here. At best I can show you to a little river, but what good would it do if even the smallest fish could rip your throat out? Your father's a businessman, dear. At least let him manage the assets of the city. You know him. Sitting back and watching his daughter do all the work for him is killing him. Cassarai shook her head. There's no money to manage. You already know your father has several ideas, dear. Don't be like this. Bang. Cassarai suddenly stood up, her palms nearly flattening the desk. Her frustration boiled over in her eyes as she practically seethed. You're not getting it. Everything takes strength. Strength. And more strength. I'm not letting my parents go out to die, do you understand? Casseret's chest heaved before a wooziness hit her. She had stood up too fast, and the fatigue of the last several days hit her in waves. Her mother was a marine biologist, but what good was it when she couldn't study creatures without risking her life? Her father was a businessman, but how would he do business without interacting with those vicious men and women who called themselves adventurers? The system city was close, but that was only relatively speaking. It would still take an hour on foot at least to get there. This wasn't Earth, there were no paved roads, and any creature that was even still in this region at all had far too much power for a normal man to deal with. Geraldine sighed and helped her daughter find a seat on the couch. Ray, Geraldine hesitated, but she eventually spoke even though she knew that it would make her daughter uncomfortable. Do you know what other creatures could kill me? How many times do you think I've been in a shark cage? How many times have I held jellyfish? How many times have I swum with whales and dolphins? N-O-V-E-L-B-J-N.C. Geraldine chuckled and gave her daughter's hand a squeeze. You've grown so much that you've forgotten that you're the child in this situation, little girl. Casseret rolled her eyes. I'm 20. You'll always be my little girl. Don't think we haven't noticed. You're slowly losing control of this city of yours, and things are becoming unmanageable. Your father and I are proud of what you've accomplished, but your friends have yet to manage to gather here once again, and if you insist on doing things on your own, it will only slip further and further out of your control. Casseret grit her teeth. Silas had told her to be wary of Gregory, her steward spawn, and she had been. But it still felt like everything was slipping out of her control. Casseret didn't believe herself to be intelligent, certainly not as intelligent as Silas, but she had always had an elite nose. She called it her bullshit detector. Gregory had done nothing untoward, but it somehow felt like everything ran through him before being filtered to her. Technically speaking, this made perfect sense. After all, he was her steward. But something smelt off about it, and Casseret couldn't put her finger on what exactly that was. The funniest part about all of this was the fact that Maya, her armored seamstress, had actually mellowed out considerably as well, giving her less to worry about. Even with all the chaos, the village had been very peaceful. It could only be said that Gregory was excellent at his job. Too excellent, especially considering he was only a common summon. The fact her parents had picked up on it told Casseret everything she needed to know. Her parents, whether her mother with academic politics or her father with business politics, had their own elite bullshit detectors. After all, that was what landed them in this situation. Casseret took a breath and pressed down her anxiety. Okay, Mom, I'll do it. I'll help you and Dad level up. When Dad is at level 9, I'll let him go to the system city. Chapter 304, Pace. Waves rolled around in a violent tempest. It almost felt like the dark, storming waters were trying to form the blades of a blender, rotating around Silas with a ferocity that made his hair stand on end. A familiar fusion crystal hovered in front of Silas as beads of sweat rolled down his forehead. Since he was caught up in having to finish this mission in 24 hours, he thought it would be a good opportunity to actually train. Having been caught up going place to place without rest, Silas realized that the fusion crystal had just been sitting in his madness key for too long. After realizing how much improvement the rune trials had given him, it was only logical to conclude that if he left too much of his chances to improve on the table, he would stagnate as well. However, he had kept trying to find the perfect time, when in reality, there was no such thing. He would probably never have a moment of peace until this summoning had at least concluded. In that case, he had to make his own time. What he didn't expect was to lift up a rock and drop it on his own foot, shattering his poor, sensitive toes. The problem wasn't actually the training. In fact, Silas' progress was shockingly fast, in one part due to his high wisdom and another part due to less than madness control, having reached legendary mastery thanks to madness. The real issue was that it was taking up a large segment of his mind, and most importantly, to benefit the most, he couldn't rely on his telekinesis to begin with. It wasn't just his telekinesis that had to be placed on the sidelines either, but also his newly minted skills. How could he train his martial arts if he was using flying dagger wizardry and ice poison magic? All of this left Silas battling it out with creatures tens of times larger than himself with nothing more than his fists and the support of basic etherflow. It was tough going, and it took him an entire hour before he finally killed the first one at the expense of a great deal of focus. Still. Comprehension detected. Madness, FFF. Dormant comprehensions. Greater than boxing, F+. Greater than taekwondo, F. Greater than Muay Thai, F. Greater than. Greater than mixed martial arts, greater than. With just one enemy defeated and in a single hour, his dormant comprehensions had gotten a great boost and a new comprehension had appeared on the list, mixed martial arts. It was just like his blade or gene talent in that it didn't have an official grade but was instead only a dashed line. But the moment Silas saw it, he knew that it was likely the one that he wanted the most. Mixed martial arts should include grappling and things of the like. I haven't even tried something like that yet. Silas was a fan of staying as far from his enemies as possible because everyone else was armed to the teeth and he couldn't even wear the simplest armors. At the very least, staying a distance away would give him time to react to anything unexpected. But he would likely not grow mixed martial arts to a very high level without this aspect. Maybe I should wait for a special striker comprehension instead, but it's odd that mixed martial arts would appear before one like that. All of the comprehensions followed the naming scheme of Earth's martial arts, and Silas found that to be a bit odd. There was certainly martial arts from other worlds out there, but Silas wasn't very sure of how to tap into them. Let's go to the next target. At this pace, I can't afford to slack at all. Silas felt a resonant hum run through his body as he punched out. An infant sperm whale was sent flying away, digging a large trench in the waters that was quickly enveloped. Its mother wasn't very happy, its tail lashing out. Under this kind of strike, Silas would almost certainly dodge out of the way. This sperm whale had strength likely approaching 500. It was already level 5, and it even had the support of 2 level 2 babies by its side. With his 170 constitution, Silas had no right to confront it. But that was when his body flashed with black scales. His gaze sharpened as a tail grew from the small of his back. He stomped down a foot, causing ripples of water to flutter out in a manner that was almost too gentle considering the situation. His torso tensed, his hips torquing as his leg whipped out to meet the oncoming tail. There was a flash of green flames and his leg seemed to be enveloped by several shadows of the same attack all at once. Bang, bang, bang. It was a single blow, but there was a rapid fire effect as though several had landed. The feeling of smoothness and comfort ran through Silas' body. He didn't even need to look to know that his Muay Thai had reached the FF grade. However, that didn't change the pain that shook his leg and jolted up his thighs. He could feel that his groin was about to collapse beneath the pressure and he was forced to retreat, coughing beneath the effort. Still, the sperm whale mother's efforts were stopped. The black scales receded from Silas' body and he sent out a series of rapid-fire punches before the sperm whale could regain its bearings. Having been forced to turn its body to whip its tail out, and given its large size and the water around it, it simply didn't have the dexterity necessary to stop this. Silas unloaded on wounds he had already opened up, blazing green fists rocking the air. Every time he punched, his mind overlaid the warmth of the fusion crystal and the images of the best boxes he had ever seen in his life. More and more of the smallest muscles in his body were pulled into action until a resonant hum spread out. Bang! A fist shot out faster than the others, overwhelming the slower strikes from before, swallowing them up, and then blasting a hole through the side of the sperm whale. Chapter 305, 8 more. Dormant comprehensions. Greater than boxing, FF. Greater than taekwondo, FF. Greater than Muay Thai, FF. Greater than. Greater than mixed martial arts, greater than. Greater than blazing will. Silas took a breath and looked at his fist. When he saw the new comprehension on his list, he couldn't help but frown. Blazing will, that was the same as his title. Was that a coincidence? Sometimes, skills, gene talents, and even genes themselves might share the same name. Less than Voice of a King was one example of this, so it wasn't the first time Silas had seen this sort of thing. But it still felt different. This was especially so considering the last things that happened. His fist had just suddenly enveloped and swallowed up the others. That was the closest that Silas had ever come to truly fusing his telekinesis together to create a stronger effect. Well, he noticed that while the physical of his strikes didn't increase, what had increased was the tangible nature of his fist. Interesting. The weight capacity limit of Scylla's telekinesis was also active in battle. For example, he couldn't pierce a knife into a person's body and then control it to rip out their inner organs or disembowel them. The reason for this was twofold. For one, in such close connection with the affected party, their will would take effect even if they didn't have telekinesis. The impediment would stop his telekinesis from working properly. Scylla had already noticed this before. But those that could overwhelm his will like that, even in such close proximity, were very rare. The larger problem was actually the second. Weight capacity limit. This matter seemed unrelated to the example, but it was very important. If Scylla tried to draw a knife across a person's body, he wasn't just carrying the weight of the knife alone anymore, but also what force it would take to continue breaking their skin. The reason why Scylla could pierce people's bodies with his telekinesis now was the same reason there was a difference between static and kinetic friction. It took more effort to take a stationary target and make it move, than to continue moving an already moving target. If Scylla took a 1-pound dagger and tried to disembowel someone, it would begin to feel more like dozens of pounds. If the person's constitution was high, it would be even worse. This was why he preferred piercing weapons and why, although he had Azrael's sword, he rarely used it for much other than shocking others and confusing their minds. The only method that Scylla had of mitigating this trouble was the gluttony seed. But it could only be used very sparingly right now, and it required destiny to grow. He had managed to stumble into several forms of destiny now, but he wasn't foolish enough to believe that it was anything other than rare. However, just now, that had changed a bit. His fist showed signs of swallowing his will and solidifying to another level. The same problem he would face trying to disembowel someone with a knife was the same problem his fists met. Every time he used basic etherflow, it was like his enemy was receiving a full-on attack from someone who weighed 50 pounds. Although the strength was high, the momentum was lacking. If his strength was high enough to blast a hole right through a person and not meet any resistance, it was good. But if there was even the slightest pushback, the result would weaken considerably. However, that punch just now was the closest Scylla had ever gotten to one of his basic etherflow fists landing like a real punch from him. That wasn't all either. It had to be remembered that when Scylla used basic etherflow, he was also giving up portions of his ether every time. As such, it acted a lot like a skill. In that past, Scylla's boxing skill was so poor that it didn't even count as an F-skill, so rather than the normal baseline 10% boost an F-skill would give, his basic etherflow only gave him a 5% boost. But right now, he was getting the floor of a fragmented mastery FF grade skill out of it. That was a full 35% boost. A 7 times difference. The most shocking part was that while skills often cost more ether the better it was, the cost of his basic etherflow hadn't changed at all. It was like he could fire off FF grade skills for the price of phones. It was only now that Scylla realized how much potential he had been leaving on the floor. He only had 140 strength, but with basic etherflow, his fists flew like they had 189 strength instead. On top of that, he could do so from a distance and really pack a punch while avoiding damage himself. None of this answered his questions about what blazing will meant in this context, but that was fine. He didn't mind it at all considering the benefits. It would be a while before he showed any intention of fusing with the crystal anyway. He might as well take things as they come and enjoy the process. Since he could improve like this even without taking it in, then why be bothered by it? Still, I have a large, glaring weakness. If I can manage it, I'll need to find a movement skill of some sort. I'm too stationary and it's hard to tap into the strength of these dormant comprehensions when I'm on the move. The martial arts I know aren't exactly meant to be used as you run. Scylla vaguely wondered if it would be possible to integrate movement of some sort into this, but he ultimately decided that a separate skill would be better. If he could get something as powerful as less than shadow warp greater than, that would be excellent. But he wasn't going to hold his breath. On that front. This is the second. 8 more to go. Scylla suddenly threw out a fist and the only rampaging baby sperm whale remaining was killed swiftly. This one had taken a full 2 hours instead of the one the first one had taken, but he had improved even more. Chapter 306. Scylla was absolutely relentless in his pursuit of power. As he improved rapidly, he vaguely began to understand that it wasn't just a matter of less than madness control and his wisdom. All things considered, his less than madness control wasn't even an FF skill, and his wisdom was only 122. Neither of these things was particularly groundbreaking. The biggest reason for all of this was because of his legendary path. His sensitivity to genes, their movements, what influences they had on his body, and how his body integrated with them. That sixth sense of sorts had all come from his experiences with extricate. He had attempted a fusion with all of the physical genes several times more than he could even count, and it was in part due to these experiences that he had managed to improve less than madness control to gold mastery so quickly, allowing him to tap into legendary mastery with the help of his madness comprehension. Part of the reason Silas had held back on using the fusion crystal for so long wasn't just because he didn't have the time to train, but he also felt that it would take a lot of effort and time. As a man of Earth, he was well versed in the fact it took boxers and other martial artists years, decades even, to hone their craft. But he had neglected one important thing. This was no longer the normal world. There were shortcuts to be taken, and not taking advantage of them because of some assumptions about olden, outdated ideals. Having reached this point in his thoughts, Silas took out a gene core. His body couldn't absorb any more bronze genes, but he had upgraded his extricate talent, and now he could even use it on silver genes. Since he gained so much even by failing to fuse with genes. What was the harm if he failed on purpose a few times? A part of him wanted to keep these gene cores because he needed 198 bronze genes no matter which of the three paths he took. But 198 was such a large number that hoarding them now might actually hinder him. If it was the rarer mental genes he had in his possession, then he might hesitate to use them so wantonly. But the sperm whales all had just 1 or 2 strength bronze genes. The Arctic king cobras were similar, only having 1 or 2 constitution genes. It was worth it. Silas' mind went blank for a moment as he plucked out the gene and pressed it into himself. The runes of a bronze gene were far more complete. Silas would have analyzed them, but even trying made his head hurt. It was clear that the gap between runes of this caliber and ones that he had used in the past was far too vast. He would definitely need to upgrade Enchanted Scholar if he wanted any chance at that. But that was a matter for another time. The moment the gene burst apart, Silas began nipping at the edges. The insights flooded into his mind, and even though he had failed to take them in this time, he felt an overwhelming sense. As though his wisdom was still too low to grasp it all. The gap between a bronze gene and a common gene was far larger than even he expected. But the good news was that he had 6 bronze strength genes and more than a dozen constitution genes. Truthfully, he expected far more out of the strength genes. They didn't just teach him how to increase his strength, but more importantly, how to use it more efficiently. The more he caught these faint insights, the more he felt that there was so much more to learn about strength control. By the time he had already absorbed all the strength genes he had, Silas thought through many of the bottlenecks that he had already come to reach. He punched out but shook his head a moment later. After adjusting himself, he tried again. This time, there was a strong force that came from his legs and one could almost see the power transferring from his lower body to his fist. The sound of whipping fabric echoed as his fist stopped in the air. Behind them, his eyes glowed as he seemed to have grasped something. I really want to see what the speed and dexterity genes can bring me. They should be able to help greatly as well. Dormant comprehensions. Greater than boxing, FF+. Greater than taekwondo, FF. Greater than Muay Thai, FF. Greater than. Greater than mixed martial arts. Greater than blazing will. After those 6 strength genes, he had improved again. He had noticed a noticeable decrease in improvement speed after he reached the double F grades. But this blew right by that. Although he was a little less excited for what Constitution would bring him, Silas still felt that it was irresponsible to not at least try first. He had only been in this world for a short time, but he had already noticed that there was some great overlapping factors between different stats. It would be too stupid of him to not even try. The actual result, though, floored him. Silas pressed the Constitution gene into his chest. It shattered apart in a rain of runes and bronze lights. The insights came slowly before they started rumbling forward like an endless tide. Silas stood in a daze for a while that lasted even longer than it had for the strength genes. He felt like several things were consolidating and his thoughts were becoming sharper and faster. When his eyes cleared up, an understanding dawned on him. Constitution wasn't just related to how hard a person's skin and bone were, but it was an overall assessment of how well oiled the body was. Flexibility actually fell mostly beneath the umbrellas of constitution rather than dexterity like one might think. If strength decided how strong you were, constitution decided how easily you could deploy that strength, through what range of motions, and through what positions. The moment Silas absorbed a single one, everything collapsed and his foundation was rebuilt, his insights being reshaped in real time. Chapter 307, Surging Madness Control. Silas took a breath after seeing this. This wasn't the first time that he had absorbed a constitution gene like this, but it was somehow like the others were child's play in comparison, and the results were shocking, to say the least. He couldn't help but wonder why there was such a big gap. It was like the constitution genes of the common grade were incomplete, somehow. Boxing had reached full ready, and it had to be remembered that his own madness comprehension was only FFF. Though, this, only, was relative. Silas ignored it for now, absorbing more constitution. The impact wasn't as great as the first time. If the first was like the first rush of water out of a broken dam, then the rest were just the drizzle that came afterward. Even so, it made the insight sharper in Silas' mind. The range his shoulder was supposed to be able to rotate, whether he could press his hands to the ground while standing, the range of motion of his hips, the dexterity of his hamstrings. All of these insights flooded him. He realized now that his high constitution didn't just mean he was more impervious to damage, but it also meant that his muscles were more elastic, his skin was more supple, and even his very eyesight was better because of it. He was still limiting his body by what he presumed its limits were, and that was doing him more harm than good. Maybe part of the reason less than psychedelic punch hurt him so much was precisely because he had never truly trained his body to be powerful through all ranges of motion. Now that his constitution had been recently upgraded, and his body had been practically reborn, there was no better time to do this. If he waited a few more days or weeks, his body would end up being just as rigid as it was in the past and he would fall back into the same cycles. Using his new insights, Silas began to move his body, rotating his shoulders, stretching out his back, and pushing his hips to the limit. He had also been a flexible person, mostly because he was diligent in his training. He had thought that that had been best reflected by his dexterity, but it was only now that he understood that dexterity played maybe 20% of the role while constitution took over the other 80%. Silas swung his arms, slowly becoming more aggressive until he managed to clap the back of his hands behind his back. He lifted up his leg, pulling a knee to his chest and then rotating it outward. This progressed until it hit a perfect 180 degrees in relation to his other leg. And then he pushed it further. He could feel slight hints of pain, but he realized that his body adapted extraordinarily quickly. It should take years for anyone to gain this level of flexibility, but Silas felt that his body was adjusting in real time. Because his stats already allowed him the capability. He rolled his neck, tested out the limits of his spin, and didn't even let his wrists and ankles go. As he pushed his body to its flexibility limits, he felt that the insights from the strength genes were coming back as well. Things that he had neglected or not quite understood how they might apply became clear. Taking a breath, Silas took another step forward and swung out a fist. The sound of his tendon echoed. It was a sound that only Silas could hear, and it was so soft that he almost missed it, but when he confirmed that that was truly what he had heard, he couldn't help but feel a swell of something special in his heart. That was it. What he couldn't quite grasp before, the first time he used the strength genes, was how to make the best use of his tendons. I see, I've always known this, but it's basically impossible to really apply as a normal person. The movement of the body was essentially just a series of pulls and levers. These levers were the tendons, and they were likely the most resilient part of the body. Controlling his muscles perfectly sounded great, but if he didn't also have such strong control over his tendons themselves, he was missing out on large parts of the puzzle. After forcing his body to adapt to its true range of motion, he had essentially unclogged and set free his tendons and ligaments to move as they were meant to. That was because they were no longer being restricted by the stiffness of his muscles. The snapping of his tendons was like the strings of a bow. Every tar sound was like a confirmation that he had done something correctly, and every time he did, he felt his tendons growing looser and more agile. At first, he needed to really focus to receive that perfect feedback. But by the dozenth exchange, it came as smooth as water and as casual as breathing. Suddenly, the sound of his tendons popping began to sound in a continuous rhythm. There was a sudden explosiveness to his combat style that simply wasn't there before. Dormant comprehensions. Greater than boxing, FFF+. Greater than taekwondo, FFF+. Greater than Muay Thai, FFF+. Greater than. Greater than mixed martial arts, F. Greater than. Greater than blazing will. Silas took a breath and exhaled. The sudden change was entirely unexpected, but more than welcome. He felt more control over himself now than he did even when he used madness control. No, that wasn't quite accurate. It was more so that he had unlocked more of himself to control, and now the impact of less than madness control will be even more potent. Quest received. Surging madness control, common. Your madness control has reached the legendary mastery realm all on its own, your madness allowing you to peak toward an unprecedented realm that exists beyond its normal bounds. Grasp this chance to enhance yourself. Fragmented reward requirements. Greater than create an FFF less than madness control skill. Common reward requirements. Greater than create an FFF less than madness control skill. Chapter 308, Pods. Quest received. Surging madness control, common. Your madness control has reached the legendary mastery realm all on its own, your madness allowing you to peak toward an unprecedented realm that exists beyond its normal bounds. Grasp this chance to enhance yourself. Fragmented reward requirements. Greater than create an FFF less than madness control skill. Common reward requirements. Greater than create an FFF less than madness control skill. Silas blinked. His first thought was, how was creating an FFF skill supposed to be a common quest? He didn't even have a single skill of that rank. That just felt like a ridiculous ask. His second thought was, how was he supposed to create a skill? A template, maybe. Silas' mind drifted to a treasure type that Alex had introduced him to. But he dismissed that. Unless there was a profession known for creating skills, it was doubtful that a template would work. If I recall correctly, less than madness control was initially created through the fusion of several skills. Less than little madness greater than, less than middle madness greater than, and less than big madness greater than. Do I need to fuse it again? How do I do that? Silas stood lost in thought for a long while until he was struck with something else. The reason the quest triggered should also be a clue. This wasn't just a matter of less than madness control reaching legendary mastery. It was also about why it had, and that was obviously related to Silas controlling his body to a greater degree. Silas thought deeper and recalled several things. Little madness skill. A little bit of madness never hurt anyone, however it is nothing to you. Use the madness to increase your power. Plus 200% constitution. Plus 100% strength. Middle madness skill, N-O, Vel, B, JN.C, Om. A little bit of madness never hurt anyone, however it is nothing to you. Use the madness to increase your speed. Plus 200% speed. Plus 100% dexterity. Big madness skill. A little bit of madness never hurt anyone, however it is nothing to you. Use the madness to increase your strength. Plus 300% strength. Now that he thought about it, the boosts he got from those 3 madness skills were absolutely insane. Comparatively speaking, less than madness control seemed to be lacking greatly. Unfortunately, he didn't have less than basic scouting back then, so he had no idea what the grades for these skills were supposed to be. But as far as he knew, even an FFF plus skill should be hard-pressed to give a 100% to raw stats, let alone 300% like these skills did. Going back and recontextualizing everything, Silas couldn't help but wonder. Had he gotten screwed over with the fusion? Or was this maybe the chance to remedy that? Still, these 3 should definitely be a clue. Silas slotted this matter away. He would just have to take things one step at a time. However, he did already have an idea about how things would go. If the Arctic Emperor Cobra was any indication, then beyond FFF+, there should be bronze. In that case, could it be that less than little madness and the other skills were actually above the FFF+ grade? That was possible, and it made one wonder. Just what kind of dungeon was the Slithering Madness dungeon to hand out such rewards, and how much potential did Less Than Madness Control have to need such powerful skills to fuse together to create it? Wait, Scylla's eyes widened again. Less Than Madness Control wasn't the only skill he got in the Slithering Madness dungeon, he also got Less Than Maddened Enlightenment Greater Than. In fact, hadn't he created Less Than Maddened Enlightenment himself? He didn't receive it from a reward, nor was it a fusion, he had. I grasped it from my madness comprehension. That was when it all came together for Scylla's. The secret to all of this should be in elevating his madness further. Clenching his fists, his gaze flashed with understanding. Scylla's pulled out the sperm whale den once again, locked onto his next target, and surged forward. Scylla's completely lost himself in battle. He didn't seem to know fatigue at all. If he wasn't fighting, then he was eating the pre-cooked meat he had made before setting out. His body, whether for food or battle, seemed to not know satiation. In truth, if he had to summarize the experience in just a word, it would be fulfilling. He had never had so much fun before. At some unknown time, there was even a light smile that curled his lips. The more he enjoyed it, the faster his battles seemed to go. He should have been growing more tired, but instead, he became sharper, his body became more refined, and he could even feel himself growing in size. It had only been half a day by this point, but he seemed to have made the equivalent progress a dedicated newbie gym-goer could only make in 3 months. The power of his stats, the high-level meat, and his deep understanding of his physical stats all came to a head. Scylla's didn't believe it would be an exaggeration to say that in this dedicated training period, his combat effectiveness had grown by almost 2 times. By the time only half the day had passed, Scylla's had already defeated 9 of his 10 targets. He was currently locked in combat with the 10th and final one. This time, it wasn't a sperm whale, but the den said that the type and affinity was correct, so Scylla's jumped into battle without hesitation. But truthfully, most wouldn't make such a decision. Bottlenose Dolphin, FFF+. Level, 6. Physical, 210. Mental, 197. Will, 131. The problem weren't the stats, though they were very powerful as well. The main issue was that Scylla's wasn't a marine biologist, and he also wasn't aware that dolphins were extremely social creatures that lived in pods of up to 100. He hadn't even been aware that dolphins could appear here. His target had been alone when the battle first began, but the moment it felt like things were going south, it let out a series of high-pitched clicking noises, and suddenly, Scylla's found himself drowned by water bullets from all directions. Chapter 309, Riding on a Wave. Scylla's didn't panic. He realized immediately after a quick scan that the level 6 FFF+ elite dolphin was an anomaly. The other dolphins were far weaker. Some had levels that were higher, but stats that were far inferior. This made sense. Even the largest bottlenose dolphins were only about 200 kilograms or so. If they were compared to the sperm whale that had weights that could only be counted in the thousands of kilograms, they would obviously fall short. The elite dolphin was clearly in a league of its own, being almost 5 meters long and easily weighing over 1,000 pounds. But that was still not even a tenth the weight of a sperm whale. The true danger it posed was in its stats. Scylla's body moved as the rain of water bullets surged toward him. He dodged out of the way of many, mapping their trajectories in his visualization. With a sudden, forceful stop, the water beneath him churned as he sent out several punches. None of these used basic etherflow, but he met the water bullets with his fists head-on. PA, 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 PA. He didn't even feel the slightest stinging sensation. He ripped through them one after another, sending a rain of water into the distance that was swallowed up by the still ongoing storm. Suddenly, his ether vanished from his feet and he slipped into the churning waters beneath him, just barely dodging the lunge of a dolphin. He was instantly attacked from down below, but his eyes flashed with a dense, green light. He struck out with a vicious kick that cut through the water. His ether skin formed a point that reduced the drag, his hips trembled with a built-up torque, and he unleashed all his strength on a single point. Bang! The head of the level 3 dolphin exploded beneath the strength. Silas stomped once and soared above water level once again, only to find a long trench of water rushing right at him. He knew that this was a skill of the elite dolphin. It was a charge skill that also allowed it to use the displaced water in a frontal attack when it collided. It was definitely one of its most dangerous attacks. Clearly, it had anticipated Silas' appearance and acted accordingly. They said that dolphins were among the most intelligent creatures in the animal kingdom, and now that they were steadily evolving, this was only becoming more true. However, by this point in the battle, Silas had long become used to its intelligence, and that much allowed him to comprehend one thing. It wasn't nearly as intelligent as he was. Silas rushed at it. At the perfect moment, his mouth opened and he unleashed a roar. Less than Arctic howl greater than. The dolphin's charge skill was a lot like his less than Arctic howl greater than. It required perfect timing and control to release everything in a single point of impact. Silas disrupted it not only by rushing ahead but also by deploying this expanding defensive skill. The trench of water collapsed and the level 6 was disoriented for a moment. Silas' fist descended from above and he activated basic etherflow for the first time in this battle. His strength explosively increased by 60%, rising above 220 stat points in an instant. Bang! The level 6 was driven into the water. Not good enough. Silas realized it immediately. His strength didn't overwhelm the dolphin's constitution by enough points to kill it instantly, and because there was water all around, it cushioned the blow further. His control still wasn't enough. The surrounding dolphins pounced at the same time. They had only dispersed to allow the level 6 to cast its charge skill, so the moment they saw their leader take such a hit, they were immediately enraged. Dozens caused the waters to become even more violent than what the storm above made possible. Waves rose and dark waters blocked his vision. Silas only took a calm breath, his torso flexing and his hips turning. His tendons popped and crackled as he unleashed a rain of fists. Like a torrential, pelting rain, the shadows exploded in the air as Silas sent out a half-dozen in a breath. 6 dolphins died on the spot, but a 7th managed to make it through. Silas didn't panic, tilting his body to the side and grabbing out at its tail. The dolphin must have weighed over 300 pounds, but that didn't stop Silas' fingers from digging into its flesh and piercing right through. He grunted once and his body exploded with power. Right at that moment, the elite dolphin came back in a furious rage, a clear dent on its head. However, it was only in time to find its comrade being swung down right upon it. That was when something that struck even Silas with horror happened. He hit the dolphin with a savage boom, but right after, the dolphin he had used as a weapon let out a blood-curdling screech. Not once during this entire battle, no matter what carnage Silas had wrought, did a dolphin make such a sound. And soon, it became clear why. The dolphin exploded into a rain of ash. Silas' heart skipped a beat. The scorned raps were truly ruthless. They didn't even allow such a loophole to exist. If he used a person as a weapon, this would be their fate. At the same time this happened, the head of the elite dolphin also exploded. Silas' strength was already exaggerated. Swinging a 150-kilogram weapon was like giving wings to a tiger. The moment it collided, the effectiveness of his power was on another level entirely. The elite dolphin didn't stand a single chance. The dolphins in the surroundings went into a wild frenzy, but there was clear fear in their eyes. With the improvement to their intelligence, they also valued their lives much more. Silas ignored them, bringing out the den once more and diving into the water to bring up the mutilated corpse of the level 6. This should be the last. Silas took a breath and exhaled. The den thrummed and exuded a blue light that enveloped the dolphins, slowly absorbing it. Den establishment challenge complete. Just as Silas was about to read the rest of the notification, his gaze sharpened and he looked up. In the far-off distance, several kilometers away, there was a man riding on a tall wave. The feeling he gave off was far too familiar to Silas. Asriel. Chapter 310, Lycerius. Silas didn't mean that it was literally Asriel, though he wouldn't be surprised if it was. Considering Alex had come back from the dead, it would be hard to surprise Silas with such a thing anymore, especially considering Asriel, if Silas was correct, was a member of an alien race. Another one, huh? Silas couldn't see this person's stats, but he wasn't nearly as shaken as he had been in the past. He had an odd confidence about himself right now that was born through the battles that he had been through. Before, it had only been a small ember, but the more he fought, the fiercer it burned. Running in this environment was almost impossible, so why not take advantage of the distance to recover? Less than maddened enlightenment activated and ether rushed toward him. He then calmly took out several pieces of meat, eating them as though an enemy wasn't on the way. The power of his constitution shone through and fatigue fell off of him in waves. The dolphins realized that there was something wrong and immediately chose to escape, turning tail without looking back. At that moment, the den finally finished absorbing the final dolphin and Silas calmly put it away without checking the rest of the notifications. By this point, he could finally see the man clearly. LitRPG quiz. Level, 15. Physical, 321, mental, 391, will, 387. LitRPG had been trying to find the den for hours already. For some reason, its aura would leak out for a short time before it blinked out. He hadn't been able to lock onto it for long enough to find it, so he had had no choice but to try to triangulate it, moving in the general direction of the aura and hoping that he'd eventually run into it. It was only when he saw Silas in the distance that he understood why this was. But once again, he was shocked. What Silas didn't know was that no normal storage device would be capable of storing a den. There were many powerful, high-grade items that would destroy a spatial device with even an attempt, and a den, especially one of this caliber, certainly would. Of course, LitRPG was making this deduction based on the treasures the humans at this point in the summoning should have access to. This was why he hadn't even considered the fact that the reason the aura kept disappearing was a spatial device. When he saw that this human was also looking at him with a calm expression, his apprehension increased. To not only have such a powerful storage device but to not run upon seeing his stats. It seemed that he had run into a tough opponent. LitRPG hesitated. Should he run? His pride didn't want to allow him to, but he was much too suppressed in this world. Although much of his battle instincts remained, he had yet to even find any skills to use. His cousin had admonished him several times, reminding him that he should. But in the end, he felt that it would be too boring. If he had skills, who would even be able to threaten him? The wave he rode reached its end and collapsed, but he only landed lightly on the ocean's surface, the rush of water around him not bothering him in the slightest. Level 0. LitRPG finally decided to check Silas' stats and instantly made a decision. Unacceptable. Silas watched as the expression on LitRPG's face changed until he suddenly became resolute. There was a flash of light and then the latter took out a silver spear. He had yet to attack with it, but the rolling of the waves shifted. The next change was sudden. In one moment, they were standing as though just observing one another, and in the next, LitRPG's spear had already appeared before Silas' throat. Silas was taken aback. The explosiveness was too fast. It made his own body control look like nothing more than a joke. He exploded to his optimal state in an instant, and didn't even seem to have relied on a gene talent like sudden burst. There was no time to cast a skill. Silas could only lean back, tightening his core and curling away from the blade. LitRPG's eyes narrowed. He had been over 80% certain that this strike would kill Silas, but he had actually managed to react. What he didn't know was that just a day ago, that was truly what would have happened. But the Silas of now was no longer the same. Silas hit the water and dispersed his ether. With a push of his telekinesis, he descended quickly, opening up a distance between the two. When he resurfaced, the two were already over 5 meters apart. There was a deep furrow between Silas' brow and he realized that there was a big difference between Asriel and this LitRPG. LitRPG seemed more frivolous and careless than Asriel, but in action, it was the opposite. Asriel hadn't taken him seriously until it was too late, but LitRPG seemed to have the determination to use every ounce of his strength to kill him. Why was that? Was it because of the den? It didn't seem to be so. A flare of will sparked in Silas' eyes. His fists clenched and unclenched, and then he suddenly accelerated. Bang! Silas' fist exploded through the air and the crackle of his tendons caused LitRPG's ears to twitch. The latter couldn't help but be surprised again, but this time, his spear was even more vicious. Before, he had sacrificed strength for speed, but now he displayed his real skill. It seemed like the same thrust, but Silas felt as though a mountain had appeared before him. For a moment, he thought that it was a visualization skill like less than psychedelic punch greater than. However, it was entirely unable to impact Scylla's mind, shocking Lysarius again. Fist and blade collided. The water beneath their feet shook and the reverberating ether spread in all directions. Chapter 311, Warp. A battle erupted between the two, and with every exchange, Lysarius was shocked again and again. Scylla seemed to have no care for the fact he was facing off against hard steel with his flesh and blood. He had noticed before that the scorned raps might have a minor boost to his constitution, just 10%, but it had two oddities. 1. It seemed to be able to uphold its rules no matter the target. Even treasures that should be far beyond it in grade were burnt to ash the moment Scylla's touched them. And 2. They seemed to be indestructible. No matter how hard Scylla's punched, no matter how sharp the target, there wasn't even the slightest nick on them. So long as Scylla's could withstand the pain, and his bones could withstand the impact. These scorned raps might very well be the only armor he needed. Of course, the gap between his constitution and Lysarius's strength was too wide to be so boldly meeting it like this. However, not only did Scylla's have the support of his ether skin, but he was also using basic etherflow. His ether skin could withstand 200 damage on its own, weakening Lysarius's potent strikes by up to half before they even touched his fist. Then, his 170 constitution was boosted to almost 190 by his scorned raps before basic etherflow boosted it by yet another 60%. His ether flowed smoothly, replacing the broken ether skin with every strike, and every reverberating impact made Lysarius's wrists quake. It wasn't yet to the point of pain, but Lysarius could feel that, somehow, every strike was growing in power. To him, Scylla's was a decent fighter, but he was still lacking in several aspects. However, by the time they had exchanged dozens of moves, Scylla's had already begun to incorporate some of Lysarius's battle sense into his own movement. Lysarius's heart couldn't help but shake. When did the humans gain such a person? Scylla's grimblade, that. Pa. Scylla's tendons exploded like a rain of firecrackers. He suddenly sidestepped Lysarius's spear, feinting a punch that Lysarius overreacted to. Then, he ducked beneath Lysarius's spear and rolled to the other side, his steps moving with a deathly fluidity. He looked more like a boxer doing rope work than he did someone fighting out a battle of life and death. He vanished into Lysarius's blind spot, causing the latter to panic and swipe out wildly, but that only opened up his torso to Scylla's. Scylla's uncorked a violent uppercut right into Lysarius's liver. The spearman found all the air being forcefully ejected from his body as his ribs cracked and fractured. It was just a single lapse in judgment, yet Scylla's capitalized on it with the speed of a veteran in battle. Scylla's had been internalizing Lysarius's battle style from the very start, taking and learning from him what he could. What he hadn't expected was that process also allowed him to ease himself into an understanding of Lysarius's style. Before he knew it, he even felt like he knew what would happen before it did. Lysarius coughed up a mouthful of blood, hurriedly using the momentum of Scylla's punch to retreat further. Scylla's didn't seem to notice, punching out as though Lysarius was still right before him. Unlike ignorant opponents, Lysarius didn't assume that Scylla's would miss. Instead, his hair stood on end. Pain. A fiery green fist suddenly appeared before Lysarius's face. Even though he had been ready, it still wasn't enough. Lysarius felt his nose crack and his face almost fracture. Any stronger and even his skull would have collapsed beneath the strength. With a sudden roar, Lysarius sent out a pulse of ether in all directions. Scylla's punched out again, but to his shock, his telekinesis wasn't working as well anymore. He had been able to allow the previous fist to appear right in front of Lysarius, but this one only appeared a single foot from his real fist before shuttling forward like a ranged attack. Obviously, this time, Lysarius was more than ready. He swung out his spear and shattered the fist, looking towards Scylla's with a malevolent look in his eyes. Blood flowed down his nose and down his chin, dripping into the water below. Then, taking Scylla's off guard, he actually turned and ran. Though Scylla's was surprised for a moment, he wasn't slow to react. He rushed after Lysarius, but found that the latter was too much faster than him. Scylla's eyes narrowed and he communicated with the Basilisk King. He couldn't possibly allow this man to run. Before, he could only settle for killing Azrael with a trick. But this time, since he had the strength to fight Lysarius, how could he not capture him and question him? Of course, he knew that he had only managed to capitalize on a small lapse. Lysrius certainly wouldn't make such a mistake so easily again. And now, he was also prepared for his telekinetic basic etherflow. However, what did that matter when Silas still had such a trump card he had yet to use? Scales suddenly erupted across Silas' body and a tail formed from the small of his back. His speed suddenly exploded. When Lysrius looked back, his eyes couldn't help but widen. There were many rules restricting those in system cities, and for the most part, they were in the dark about the happenings in the outside world. At least outside of their own immediate territories, they weren't able to play a game on as large a scale as the human powers could. Before, Lysrius didn't think that this would matter much, and he was arrogant beyond belief before he laid eyes on Silas. But now, he definitely wished that he would have had such an ability. If he had, he would have recognized the name Silas Grimblade immediately. N-O-V-L-B-J-N.C. Lysrius found their separation being cut in half in an instant of time, and in another blink, Silas would really catch him. Gritting his teeth, he realized that he had no choice. He put his spear away and brought out a badge of swords. He crushed it, and in the next instant, there was a wild fluctuation of space before he vanished. Silas came to a hurried stop, his brows furrowing. He had actually managed to escape. Just as Silas was about to see if there was anything he could do to remedy the situation, the region changed again. The fluctuations of space warped and Silas' heart skipped a beat. Chapter 312, Spatial Storm. Silas felt as though the spatial storm was trying to suck him in. He could sense a great amount of his ice poison ether being pulled into it as well, and though he knew that Lysrius was likely on the other side, he had no intention of trying to cross over. He had no idea where Lysrius had escaped to. It would be fine if it was just another location in the ocean, but what if it was to a city? Or even worse, a system city? If he was pulled in, he might die before he even understood the situation around him. The suction was strong, so much so that Silas even wondered if Lysrius had planned this all along. Even with his current physical, having fused with the Basilisk King, he could feel himself slipping. Just when he was about to lose his footing entirely, his thoughts flashed and he recalled the pulse of ether Lysrius had sent out before, the very same one that had managed to stifle his telekinesis. Then, he recalled how he learned to use his telekinesis to interrupt and stop skills from being activated. Those two experiences linked onto one another and Silas dug deep, activating his gluttony seed and basic etherflow. He thought of controlling his ether skin, but there was no time to get it right. He had to change tactics. His mouth opened and he unleashed a roar. Less than Arctic howl greater than. Boom. His telekinesis and less than Arctic howl layered on top of each other, forming a dispersing barrier of greenish blue that rippled out in all directions. The suction force of the spatial storm was forcefully dispersed and Silas faintly heard a grunt that sounded somewhat like Lysrius on the other side. The spatial storm collapsed and Silas stumbled backward, gasping for breath. He took 2 heaving breaths, feeling as though he had just survived another life and death moment. His intuition, or more accurately, his luck was telling him that he definitely didn't want to be dragged into the other side. Luckily, he had managed in the end and seemed to have dealt Lysrius a blow as well. The beating of Silas' heart calmed and his body began to regulate itself. That skill. Silas had used his basic etherflow on skills before, like when he used less than momentum shift in his kunai. But this was the first time he had just used it to boost a skill in general. It was unlikely that it would work on every skill the same way, but less than Arctic howl seemed perfect for it. When basic etherflow was added, not only did it retain its defensive quality, but it also gained an ether and skill dispersing character. If it had 600 defense at first, its effective defense was much higher now. This was to say that although its defense remained the same, because Silas' telekinesis could disperse skills it came into contact with, it would have to defend against a weaker attack overall. This was very useful if it was meeting a skill head-on, but if it was defending against a bite like against the first sperm whale he fought, it was far less useful. This is interesting. Why is it that fusing basic etherflow doesn't give it a direct boost in strength like it does with my fists? Silas regained his bearings completely and stood firmly on the rolling waters. I have more experimenting to do. But now, I've wasted enough time on these waters. It's time to go. Silas had been getting closer to the island all this time. At this point, he was no more than half an hour away. It was about time to see if this mysterious city lord was truly Kasari. Lysarius stumbled out of the spatial storm. Rather than appearing at the core of the system city like he had expected, Scylla's actions had disrupted the teleportation, sending him spiraling a distance away instead. He fell from almost 50 meters in the sky, crashing into the trees down below. He had already been injured by Scylla's strike to his liver. If not for his constitution, that attack alone would have shut his entire body down. But now, his situation was even worse. Hitting the ground with a dull thud, he groaned, his body shaking as he tried to push himself up. His ribs were a shattered mess, and now he had even broken an arm. He couldn't even properly wield his spear like this. A little human had actually forced him into this situation. Several seconds later, he managed to pull himself up, gasping for breath. Then, with a slow trudge, he made it back to the city. What the hell happened to you? Plinley looked at Lysarius with a deep frown. His cousin had only been gone for less than a day, how had he ended up like this? Lysarius collapsed onto a soft couch, dyeing the white fibers in red. But he didn't seem to care and he spoke about everything. Plinley's frown deepened when he realized that the den was lost to a human, only to relax somewhat afterward. The likelihood that such a powerhouse was linked to Kasari was next to zero. However, when Lysarius mentioned that Scylla's was only level O, his expression changed completely. That's impossible. Earth doesn't have any bloodlines that are so powerful. Lysarius looked at Plinley with a mocking sort of anger. He was already in this state, and they were so close, was there a need to lie? You idiot, Plinley spoke bluntly. There are a million different ways that you could see level O when it's actually much higher. The Earthlings already have several level 15s and above. If there's a slightly more talented one, you could end up being dealt with if you're careless. You went out without loading any skills and thought you were invincible even though I warned you. You deserve what happened. Lysarius's gaze flickered. Indeed, there were plenty of ways to fake levels. Could he have been overthinking it? Chapter 313, Machinations in the Dark. Lysarius frowned, but in the end, he felt that the odds his cousin was correct were high. Still, he felt that there was something wrong. Sure, there were plenty of ways to hide one's true level. Scylla's himself had experienced such a thing due to Lauren and Alex. But, usually, such methods would pick something that made sense. Both Lauren and Alex had picked levels that matched the situation, but picking level O just seemed foolish. It wouldn't fool anyone. There seemed to only be two explanations. Either Scylla's was truly level O, or he was just fond of snubbing his nose at other people. Lysarius could easily imagine a world where a lone warrior like Scylla's wanted to go around with level O hanging above his head just to show off. If it really was the latter case, Lysarius couldn't help but grit his teeth. Plinley let out a laugh. He laughed so hard that he grabbed his stomach. I see, you probably thought of running, but didn't because you thought he was a real level O. What a saint. Fuck you. Hearing this, Plinley only laughed harder. Indeed, Lysarius only fought after noticing Scylla's level. That was because if Scylla's was truly a level O, he was a top priority target to be killed. Having such strength at level O was not normal. It demarcated an individual who was trying to excavate all of his potential before accepting the baptism of the system. If this was a summoned world, it would only be natural. Children all did this, only continuing on to level 1 when they had unearthed the best foundation they could. However, in a world in the middle of its summoning, this was several times scarier. Summoned worlds had a set number of resources that were already mostly divided between various factions, and often those resources had to be used as tributes and taxes to even larger overlords. Even if you had more potential to be excavated, such a thing would, in all likelihood, be wasted. In a world in the process of being summoned, even though there was technically a potential cap as well, it was flexible depending on the situation. Earth was a decent world. It was capped at bronze potential and could likely bloom a few silver experts at best. This already put it slightly above average and that was why so many wanted a piece of it. However, if the system found something or someone that it was interested in, it might be willing to invest more. That was an unacceptable outcome. That was because if certain powers of Earth gained enough favor, and they succeeded in completing their summoning, it might even be possible for them to qualify for an ascension. If that happened, the powers that had invested so much into taking down Earth before it could bloom would be left with nothing at all. Silas Grimblade, you said his name was. We can try to monitor information about this, though it will be difficult with the restrictions. That's easy enough, Lysarius sneered. They're all nothing but fools. Just bring one in from the streets, offer them a few F-coins and they'll tell you everything you need to know. They weren't allowed to access Earth's nexus, so they didn't know what the leaderboard situation was like. And they also couldn't interact with Earthlings directly without the use of special methods. But that didn't mean that they didn't have their ways. That's tricky. I'm not ready to face a taboo backlash right now. This is a sensitive time. Plus, it's something we have to save for if Castlemaine shows any signs of fighting back. I still don't know why you're so obsessed with Castlemaine. If we pay a little, I could just go wipe it out myself. Plinley shook his head. Stop taking the system so lightly. I'm not taking it lightly. I know there'll be a price to pay. But if you hold all your cards to your chest, you might miss the time to actually use them. I heard that Asriel is dead. Plinley's gaze flashed, but he didn't reply. After a long while, he still shook his head. There's something fishy about Earth this time. We've planned meticulously, but things that are out of our control keep happening. This is a world with only bronze potential, but they show far more tenacity than normal. Every time we ruin their laws and shackle their runes, they still somehow manage to return to technological dominance. Although that technology is still weaker than what they once had in the past, it shows that we cannot underestimate them in this last leg. If you can confirm for me that this Silas is truly a level O, I would be willing to do what it takes. But as for now, focus on Castlemaine, they have to be dealt with. Their city lord was given a destiny quest, and though she's only managed to complete the fragmented level of it, the rewards were ample from our calculations. If we want to control this region, she's a variable we can't allow. Lysarius grunted and pushed himself up. He shook his head and sneered. Didn't she already lose the fragmented reward of her destiny quest? She hasn't even had the time to make headway into the common leg. Still feels like you're making a mountain out of a molehill. This time, Plinley didn't respond. He knew his cousin well. He was the type to sneer and complain, but then he would do something like he had today if he thought it was for the betterment of the goals. He wasn't someone he had to worry about. Go heal yourself. When's the level cap going to increase beyond 15? I'm itching over here, Lysarius grumbled. Plinley chuckled. When that time comes, maybe we'll really be able to let loose. It's a good thing that this happened to you this time. Maybe you'll learn to stop underestimating people. Don't forget to actually load in your skills this time. Yeah. Chapter 314, Den Constitution. As Silas moved closer to the pair of portals in the distance, he pulled up the notifications that he had ignored previously. Den Establishment Challenge complete. Den Constitution. Greater than 7 sperm whales. Greater than 1 dusky shark. Greater than 2 bottlenose dolphins. Genes incorporated. Mutation lottery solidified. Interesting. Silas hadn't expected that the animals he sacrificed to the den would be used to decide what potential mutations might appear in the future. If he had known, he might have put more thought into which ones he targeted. After some thought, though, Silas shook his head. There really wasn't enough time for him to do that. He was already quite fast, only picking the nearest target and focusing on them. And yet, it had still taken him more than half a day. If he wanted to take such an approach, he would either have to have a far smaller area to scout, or he would have to be far more powerful than the target creatures. Unfortunately, in this case, he had neither benefit. By the 6th target onward, the battles had become far easier, but there had still been too many variables to deal with. The dolphin pods were just one example. It was far from the only group battle that Silas had fought. Silas could only hope that the mutations didn't weaken the overall product. All in all, he didn't believe that it would be too bad. After all, they were all FFF plus creatures. Regardless, the product would at least be at that level. The den was sure to be invaluable. I should slow down a bit. Silas took a breath. He shouldn't be far from being able to see the island on the horizon, and that would also mean that he wasn't far from more danger. The good news was that the government was unlikely to have patrols here. The bad news was that this was almost certainly because it was far too dangerous. With the existence of not just 1, but 2 portals, there was definitely a large population of beasts in the region. There was also the question of the underwater portal to consider as well. If there was a portal that had opened up at the bottom of the ocean, it would almost certainly lead to some violent current nearer the surface. Even if the portal was large, that ocean was so vast that it was impossible for it to be drained in a short time. The main issue, then, was what changes that might cause to the surface of the water. If the other side of the underwater portal was more water, then maybe an equilibrium could be reached depending on the size of the body of water on the other side. But, just standing here, Silas could already feel the strong churning of the water. The storm above was already bad enough, but the waves definitely felt far worse here. Silas had spent all of the last day using up and replenishing his ether. He wasn't just physically fatigued, but mentally fatigued as well. He knew that he wasn't in the best state to tackle this challenge, but there also wasn't exactly somewhere he could go to relax in a situation like this one. With a breath, he stepped forward and then shot ahead. He was shrouded in scales by his third step and his speed accelerated. Since there was no easy way forward, he might as well take the blitz method. What Silas didn't expect was that he wouldn't run into any obstruction at all. Maybe he was too fast, maybe the beasts were scared off by his appearance or strength, but whatever the reason, he quickly found himself closing in on the shore. He didn't allow his surprise to slow his steps. In fact, he became more alert just in case. But once again, nothing happened even as his feet finally touched down on the ground once again. Silas let out a light sigh. He hadn't realized just how much he missed solid ground until this moment. Well, it was a mushy sort of grainy, rock-infested beach. But, it was far better than being rocked from side to side on the ocean all day. In a few moments, Silas also realized that his strength on real land should be even greater than it had been on the ocean. If he made 2 points of improvement in the water, then it won, jn.c, on 3 here. Silas exhaled. Though this was technically an island, in reality, it was an entire borough of York City. York City was so large that even one of its 5 boroughs was enough to compete with a medium-sized city. There was still a distance to go from this location to the portal, but the rest of the journey was exceptionally easy. Silas' thoughts were proved correct. The city was basically empty. It should be the case that all the people had either been evacuated or incorporated into the city lord's city. As for the lack of beasts, there should be 2 explanations. The first was that the city was dealing with the beast waves on their side. The second was that this borough was a metal forest. There might be a zoo or 2, but other than that, there wouldn't be many beasts here that could evolve under the influence of the ether. Thanks to this, the rest of Silas' journey was even easier. He could feel that the portal was getting closer, so he chose to have a rest. He had no way to confirm if it was really Kasari, so going in while not being 100% was foolish. He randomly chose a skyscraper and broke in. Since there was no one to stop him, he chose a penthouse he certainly wouldn't have been able to afford in the past and relaxed. After filling his belly, showering in some contradictorily scalding cold water, he went to bed. The next morning, he was refreshed and ready. That was the best sleep he had had in a long while. He closed the distance on the portal, but before he could near it, a growl made his eyes narrow. Chapter 315, Frostiness. Rotten Wolf. When Silas saw the creature, his last bits of apprehension vanished. There were only so many coincidences that could pile up. Not only was this city lord from York City, they were related to a marine biologist, and now they were using creatures from the den that he had gotten for Castlemaine. There was no doubt about it. Rotten Wolf, F. Level, 6. Physical, 59. Mental, 0. Will, 0. Still, they were far too weak to do much of anything and far too unintelligent to tell friend from foe. This was likely why they were doing such a perfunctory job like guarding this side of the portal. In all likelihood, they were only here to let Kasari know of an attack ahead of time. The rotten wolf lunged at Silas, but it was much too far away. It didn't have the ability to close in on him before he could notice its existence. His visualization had long since pointed it out. With a casual sidestep, Silas dodged out of the way. He didn't want to harm Kasari's assets. From what he remembered, the den could only produce 3 rotten wolves a day. By now, the full-mouthed city lord should have quite a decent little army. But they were just too weak. The loss of even one would be a problem. Of course, Only Silas would think like this. The rotten wolves could be considered a huge reason why Castlemaine was still standing despite the situation. Most people weren't even level 5 yet, let alone level 6. And most people weren't anywhere near the double F grades. Silas could be considered unlucky. The opponents he faced, one after another, were all monsters. But the vast majority of the world was far more down to earth. This is odd though. The rotten wolves are difficult to control without the matching class. The class Stellae that I gave to Kasari should only have room for 9 more. They wouldn't be able to control so many rotten wolves. Having these zombie-like creatures walking around everywhere would also affect the morale of Kasari's city. She wouldn't release them like this unless she had no choice. Silas frowned. His thoughts ran as he dodged through an increasing number of rotten wolves. Soon, there were at least half a dozen on his tail, but he suddenly vanished into a building. They lost him through the stairs and he leapt out of a 5th-floor window. With a bend of his knees, he landed near the portal, but just as he was about to enter, he heard the sound of rattling armor and a squadron suddenly appeared, weapons at the ready. Silas came to a stop. He didn't recognize most of these people. He wasn't sure at a glance if they were militiamen or not, but luckily, he spotted one that he did recognize. Marcus Tanner, FF. Level, 10. Physical, 162. Mental, 122. Will, 91. Silas recognized this militiaman. Last time he saw him, he was just level 2, but it seemed that Kasari had noticed the weakness of her city was its lack of combat power and she had begun investing far more in that. Plus, since she had the class Stellae, getting some of her trusted subordinates to level 10 wasn't an issue. Marcus seemed to recognize Silas as well, and held up a hand to stop everyone from attacking. The city lady has told us to watch out for citizens, and Sir Silas is one of us. Stand down. Silas watched this silently. You can come with us, sir. We'll take you to the city lady right away, Marcus said politely. Silas nodded and followed along. But after stepping across the portal, he realized that things weren't so simple at all. The first thing he noticed was that the portal hadn't overwhelmed the city like it would be in most cases. Instead, it seemed to be extremely controlled, much like it had been under the influence of the disk beneath the volcano portal before. After stepping across the portal, a basement floor appeared in Silas' vision. There were guards all around, and the portal that should have been large and imposing was as minimalistic as a simple doorway. Please wait a moment, I will call an escort. Silas only nodded again and silently observed everything. Minutes later, it was Gregory that came down with Marcus and what Silas assumed were 2 other militiamen. There was a bright smile on his face as he gave Silas a polite bow. Ah, it's the hero of our little village. Come, come, I hope you don't mind a few formalities, Silas. There are a lot of bad characters targeting our village from the outside and inside these days. There's just some procedural stuff we have to accomplish and then we'll send you on your way. N-O-V-E-L-B-J-N.C. Silas looked him in the eye and nodded. Gregory proceeded to ask Silas a series of questions. They were all standard and felt no different from an airport interview. Silas gave him the casual answers he wanted, following the protocol. There wasn't anything to nitpick about his attitude. Great, the last thing we have to do is a search. Do you have any spatial devices? Gregory asked. I do not, Silas replied. Gregory checked Silas' hand and wrists with a glance, but there truly didn't seem to be anything on him. I see, no issues, then. Gregory was only spawned after the Rotten Wolf attack and the Madness Key didn't look anything like the usual spatial devices. Just as Gregory was about to let Silas go, there was a slight commotion and another group came down to the basement. This time, it was led by a familiar valiant woman. Kasari was still wearing a set of leather armor that clung tightly to her chest, torso and waist. Her legs were long and every stride seemed to take 2 or more for others to keep up with. There was a frostiness about her that Silas quite recognized. It was the kind of expression she would have when she was pissed but was forcing herself to remain calm. Chapter 316, City Lady. There was an odd tension in the air. It would have likely made anyone else uncomfortable, but Silas stood in silence as though he hadn't noticed anything at all. He had already felt that something was wrong long ago. He was incredibly sensitive to such things. Honestly, he didn't need such confirmation. From the moment Gregory appeared, he had already warned Kasari about him. But there were some things that couldn't be avoided even if you were prepared. Plus, Silas still didn't have a full understanding of the situation just yet. Maybe he was still overthinking things. After all, Kasari wasn't exactly a woman who would be overly cheery all the time. Thank you for your hard work, everyone. Kasari gave them all a curt nod. Silas, come with me. She turned away and left after a swift inspection of things. Silas took a sit on Kasari's couch. Looking at the gloominess on her face, he found himself becoming more amused. A small smirk quirked on the corner of his lips, so subtle that most wouldn't notice it at all. But that seemed to be the greatest provocation to this lioness. What the hell are you laughing about? Silas rubbed his nose. It was really only Kasari and his mother that would pick up on that. Go ahead, laugh it up. Giggle until glitter comes out your ass, come on. I warned you. Thanks, Sherlock, she spoke with a huff, spinning around in her chair so that she wouldn't have to look at Silas' annoying face. He was too useful. By the time I felt that something was wrong, it was already too late. Without him, the village would have already collapsed. What happened? Silas asked. After an annoyed huff, Kasari explained the situation. It seemed that the salt water wasn't the only problem, neither were the portals. It all boiled down to an honest mistake on her part, and something that Silas had seen coming before she spoke it. Spawns. The issue wasn't actually Gregory and Gregory alone, but rather how Kasari and Olivia had interacted with the spawns. It was a matter of philosophy and a contradiction of the mind. It was too difficult for them to take the spawns as the living beings that they should. Kasari didn't mention any of this in her explanation. She was able to pick up on a lot of the little details, like how no one approached her for a bonfire dance they held 2 weeks ago, or how most felt more comfortable reporting things to Gregory instead of her. But she hadn't been able to see the big picture. That was just how things were with Kasari. She was more of a live-in-the-moment person than Silas was. As for Silas, it was difficult for him to not step out of the frame if he didn't have to. You know what the problem is, Silas said after a long while. It's that damn annoying bastard. Kasari said through gritted teeth. Maybe, but that's still too surface level. Don't patronize me, Silas, or else I'll sick my dad on you. Silas suddenly coughed, sitting up as though he was afraid that he would choke. Seeing this, Kasari couldn't help but sputter with laughter. She laughed so hard she fell out of her chair. The problem wasn't that Silas felt fear. Fear wasn't something he experienced, father of an ex of his or not. The problem was something else entirely. Silas cleared his throat. He couldn't remember the last time he had ended up in such a state. It was best he ignored it and moved on. The problem is that you're not treating them like they're human. Kasari slowly pulled herself up off the floor. Placing her hands on the desk, she stared at Silas intently as though she was trying to see something. But after a while, she nodded. It really was too hard to treat these villagers like they were human when you literally watched them spawn from thin air. However, she had to admit that no matter how hard she had tried before, she wasn't able to find any flaws. They all had perfect backstories, each one had a distinct personality, there was no copying and pasting, nor were there any slip-ups in their software. If there were, she certainly wasn't smart enough to pick them out. But the issue was that all of this only made it creepier, made it feel as though human life was so cheap that this system could reproduce it in a product that was indistinguishable from the authentic version whenever it wanted. Then, probably as a subconscious result, she ended up letting Gregory take more and more control of things so that she wouldn't have to face this problem herself. Then, before she knew it, it was already difficult to reverse things. The worst part about it all was that even if she knew the problem and could even return to the past for a redo, the situation would likely end up much the same. Well, maybe it wouldn't be identical, but problems would arise nonetheless. That was because, even now that Silas had pointed out the crux of the matter, she wasn't sure how to fix it. At least not immediately. She would probably not be able to treat these people like they were real anytime soon, and even if she could start right now, it wouldn't come off as authentic. On top of that, she had problems being fake. It was the reason her mouth was so sharp in the first place. She rarely filtered herself. Don't gloat, she said, giving Silas a glare. I didn't say anything, City Lord. City Lady. All right, City Lord. Are you going to tell me how you ended up in this situation? Why did you open up your portal here? And what did Professor Broussard do? Silas saw the changes to Casseray's expression before she exploded. He let out a light sigh and then covered his ears a bit. Chapter 317, How Much Worse? That insufferable, limp-dicked, peewee-brained. Silas watched all this in silence, not interrupting at all. That would just turn the fury onto him. He liked his peace when he could get it. He had no intention of interfering at all. His suit pants are wound up so tight you'd think he was wearing a thong. Silas nodded, pulling out his water bottle treasure and taking a nice swig as he listened. Not the slightest hint of a print. He's got a pussy down there and I bet his ass shaves it too. Silas reclined, pulling out a piece of meat as he continued to listen. His stomach was already rumbling despite the fact that he had eaten just half an hour ago at most. It seemed like when he wasn't feeding his body properly, things were all fine. But the moment he started taking his nutrition more seriously, his body wanted more and more. God, he's such a bitch. You know he wears colored contact lenses. What the fuck kind of grown-ass man does that? It's months after the damned apocalypse and he still has them in stock. How many did he fucking buy? Silas continued to nod. It took a full 10 minutes for Cassaray to finish her dressing down of this professor. The funniest part about it was that she had probably only met this man once or twice before, yet she had enough material for all of this. Eventually, she just stood there, huffing and puffing. Silas was convinced these were the first breaths she had taken in the last several minutes. Clearing his throat, he spoke. Okay, so what actually happened this time? N-O-V-E-L-B-J-N.C. Fuck you, she said with a huff of breath. He wanted to start an absolutely idiotic plan. No, saying that isn't enough, it was practically genocidal. There was news that the underwater portal would appear. What? Silas sat up completely, the amusement in his eyes vanishing. What's wrong? Cassaray asked. Her anger seemed to fade when she saw the seriousness in Silas' expression as well. This is a problem. A big problem. Silas stood up. He paced around, his eyes darting back and forth. From start to finish, Cassaray remained silent. Silas usually only got like this when he was thinking through something very important. But the problem was that usually, he was smart enough that he didn't need to consider things for very long at all. The fact that he was pacing so hard now and seemed to have forgotten everything else could only mean that her words had inadvertently revealed something extremely important. Even more so considering his stats should technically make him smarter now than he had ever been. You're sure that the portal was known about ahead of time? That's what Mom said. Any more details than that? Cassaray shook her head. Mom was brought to a secret meeting where it was explained. It was only after that all the problems started. The limp dick wanted to open up yet another portal. He apparently had one on standby to an extremely hot place and wanted to disrupt the normal ecosystem. The problem is that progress wouldn't be slow or gradual at all. He might as well have wanted to dump a whole bunch of toxic sewage into the ocean. Silas frowned. Something wasn't adding up. Much the same way the portal beneath the ocean wasn't draining it completely in just a few days, neither could a portal to an extremely hot location change the situation instantly either. The specific heat of water was extremely high. It would take a lot of energy to raise the temperature of a small part of it. It was true that many fish were not good with warm waters, but this wouldn't instantly change anything either. Still, this should be why Professor Broussard wanted to take this route. When the creatures sensed the warmer waters, they would definitely leave. Unless I'm underestimating this, draining the ocean is one thing, but superheating a small portion of it. That would be much easier. Plus, the warmer waters would. Silas' expression flickered again. He remembered the tall waves and the raging storm. Warmer weather definitely came with more violent storms on top of everything. Was it a coincidence? Stop dragging me along here, what are you thinking? Cassaray asked. This Professor Broussard is a problem. I already know that. Silas shook his head. It's worse than just his idea being stupid. He's being purposely malicious. This time, it was Cassaray's turn to frown. She already knew that the man was a dick. If not, things wouldn't have gone so far over just a disagreement in philosophy. Her mother seemed docile, but when she was enraged, she was no less volatile than her father. The moment he brought up this plan, she was fiercely opposed to it. Technically speaking, it sounded like the perfect plan. The warmer waters would cause a lot of marine life to migrate away. When they were further away, they'd be less likely to sense the fluctuations of the portals and flee further. On top of that, the creatures that came from the hot portal would find themselves drowning at the bottom of the ocean if they ever appeared, while creatures coming from the first underwater portal would suffer the same fate. Casseray's mother was fiercely opposed to the plan because they had no way of knowing if the migration patterns of creatures would stay the same with the addition of ether. Plus, in this experiment of finding out, a large number of marine animals would certainly die. This wasn't just about being a bleeding heart, environmental activist. But with the supply chains of the world cut out, they had to support themselves for food. The ocean had become a key resource for them, and there was still plenty of fish they could catch closer to the shores to feed what remained of their population. If the weaker creatures that they could still easily capture suddenly died, it wouldn't just be a genocide of animals. It would also become a genocide of humans. How much worse? As bad as you think it would be for such a trusted member of the government to be working for a system city. Casseray's expression changed. Chapter 318, Depends. What? How is that possible? Casseray hated Professor Broussard. The issue wasn't just that his actions would lead to the deaths of tens of thousands in all likelihood, but that he was also cruel enough to try and suppress her mother. The entire reason for why her hand was forced was because the government tried to arrest her mother. They might as well have been watching fascism play out in real time. However, even with this being the case, Casseray hadn't thought that the professor was actually a traitor. All things considered, the government wasn't stupid. How could they trust someone like that to be at such a high position? No, even further, when was there even time for Professor Broussard to become a traitor in the first place? The system cities weren't present during the trial and they had only just appeared. Also, someone like Professor Broussard was the brains of the operation, not the muscle. He wouldn't be sent out to the field, so he wouldn't even have time to interact with the system cities after they had already appeared. Whether he entered the trial or not, it didn't seem like any of this would be possible. It was ridiculous. However, Casseray had simply never seen Silas be wrong before. At the very least, he wouldn't be wrong about something like this. She took a deep breath and calmed herself. I don't know, but I'm 80% sure, Silas replied. Silas could obviously think of the same things that Casseray could. He saw all of the same problems with his theory. Another person would have dismissed the thought because of these alone. But Silas wouldn't do such a thing. It couldn't be said that he trusted his gut, but rather that he trusted his own intellect and what they saw with his eyes. Explain. There are several problems. First, have you realized that the portals here are in the same general proximity of one another as they are in the outside world? Casseray frowned, not understanding immediately until it dawned on her suddenly. Silas nodded. Those are tall odds. Portals usually have vastly different destinations. I've seen 3 portals in close proximity before. One led to Lone Star, one led to the Africa continent, and the last led to our hometown near Veridian. Portals are never so geographically consistent. Yeah, but that still might be a coincidence, Casseray rebutted. My portal isn't natural, remember. I just opened it up. It might be the case it's like this because of me. I thought of this as well, which was why I dismissed it at first. I even think that you're probably right even now, that it's nothing more than a coincidence. Casseray only became more confused, but this time, she didn't interrupt. But, while I was out on the ocean, I ran into someone from a system city. It felt somewhat like a coincidence as well, but then I thought about it, I realized that in all likelihood, they were after the den in my hands. I thought, then, how they would know about the den. There are a ton of things about this world that I still don't understand, so I was mostly willing to ignore it in this case. Maybe they just had a treasure that I didn't know about. But then you said that the government predicted the appearance of this portal before it appeared as well. That's already the third coincidence. First, the portals appear side by side both on Earth and the ether plane. Then the system city people knew about the existence of the den when it had only just appeared. And third, the government knew about it ahead of time. Casseray listened silently, but she still felt like this wasn't enough. What if the system city located the den only after the portal appeared? After all, it had been a while. There was no guarantee that they knew the den would appear even before the portal did. The fourth problem is that the underwater portal appears high in the skies. I've already seen several portals until now. Not a single one of them hangs in the air like that. At least not without some outside interference. It feels very convenient for that to happen. It allows them to benefit from helpless creatures that fall out, and now you're telling me that they've been benefiting from the gene cores with hardly any effort at all while simultaneously ruining all the ground around you. Casseray's heart skipped a beat. Are you saying they've been targeting me the whole time? Silas looked toward Cassarai with a hint of surprise, as though he didn't expect her to suddenly leap to his conclusion before him. What's with that face? Don't make me punch your nose into your gut. Silas' lips slightly quirked again. Yes, I think they've been targeting you from the very beginning. It might not even be a coincidence that your mother was targeted. A system city would find it very difficult to deal with you on their own because there's likely a very high price to pay. But why? Silas gave her a look. That depends on where you got your necklace from. Cassarai blinked, not knowing what to say for a moment. Silas had suddenly cut to the heart of the matter despite only having small tidbits of information. Maybe she shouldn't have been surprised that he had a guess, but she couldn't help it. In the end, Legacy had gone out of its way to target Cassarai, and now there seemed to be a continuous layering of plots and schemes against her this time as well. If Silas had to guess, it should surely be related to the necklace. And further than that, unless they didn't know that Cassaray's necklace had already been stolen, then it should be the case that there was far more to how she had gotten the necklace than she had told him. Cassarai hesitated for a moment, but then, Silas saw a screen flash in front of him. Chapter 319, The Rest. Path of the Executioner, Common Quest. You have displayed a tenacious will and a sharp intent for battle, but you are missing the final piece to your power. Following the path of another is easy, following your own is much more difficult. The Executioner is the reaper of all, but wreathed in bad karma and a flagrant temper, their luck also tends to be particularly bad. Taking up this mantle will put you in untold danger, and many more will chase you down for your arrogance. Open up the path of the Executioner or die trying. Common reward requirements. Greater than behead 1,000 enemies 5 or more levels above you. Greater than extinguish a common evil cult. Silas' expression changed as he felt his gluttony seed move. Usually, the movement would stop before he could even lock onto it, but this time, it just continued to move, again and again, as though it wouldn't be satisfied unless he paid attention to it. There was an ominous feeling that welled up in Silas' heart, and then the notification disappeared before him. I was warned when this quest appeared that I shouldn't show anyone because they would be cursed by destiny as well. But Cassarai still had some conflict in her eyes despite the fact she had already done it. In reality, the moment Silas guessed that she likely had a quest, he was already infected by destiny. Of course, what Cassarai didn't know was so long as Silas didn't know the exact details, he would be fine. But now that she had shown him the exact details, he was tied to the same boat she was. Cassarai sat in her chair with a bit of a dejected appearance, her eyes watering. It was definitely all her fault. The moment Silas wanted to see the stats of her necklace, she should have said no. He had likely been infected all the way back then in her opinion. She should have said no firmly even if he made the wrong assumption and thought that it was because she didn't trust him. But she didn't have the temperament to do that. Her personality wasn't patient, and she wasn't good with others thinking ill of her. At least not when it was built off misunderstandings. But in the end, that decision back then had led to this moment. And now, there was truly no going back. Silas, how long do you have? Cassarai was trying to find the right words to break it to Silas, but she didn't expect this question instead. You know, she asked with surprise. I have a similar quest. Oh, Cassaray's eyes brightened somewhat before they dimmed again. The quest says I have 3 years at most. Silas frowned, feeling that there was something wrong with Cassaray's words. Now that he thought about it, the punishment he would receive if he failed his destiny quest was a penalty from the madness key. But Cassarai likely didn't have a madness key. His own expression changed and he stood up once again. What's your punishment? Cassarai looked up. Her expression was one part helpless and another part confused. If Silas had a similar quest, shouldn't he know? What else? She said bitterly. Death. Scylla's heart skipped a beat and he suddenly became a bit angry. Why the hell didn't you tell me earlier? How much time do you have left? Still confused, Kasari didn't quite know how to react to all of this. Even with how familiar she was with Scylla's, it was very, very rare for him to get like this. How much time? There's 2 years and about 4 or 5 months left. The trial time didn't count. Scylla's gaze continued to flicker. What do you need? Scylla's. None of the nonsense. What do you need? Normally, if someone spoke to her like this, Kasari would have already exploded, but right now. It felt just like that day back in high school, and those days back in the trial. Kasari took a breath. Scylla's, I've got this. Scylla's frowned. You've only completed the fragmented quest after more than half a year, and now you're being targeted by so many people. No, it's probably because you're being targeted by so many people that things ended up like this. Do you expect to just go at it alone? Isn't that what you do? You have your own quest to consider. I can do both, Scylla's replied. That. I said enough. Scylla's green irises blazed with a flickering emerald flame. For a moment, in Kasari's vision, all of his facial features had vanished and all she could see were those eyes. Tell me what you need. The problem isn't the quest. The problem is that I can't even leave my village. What level are you at now? What level do you need to be to leave? What do you need to accomplish to do it? Scylla's listed off a rapid-fire list of questions. Seeing that Scylla's was only growing more annoyed with every passing second as though he was watching her life blink away, Kasari had no choice but to answer. The territory levels are village, town, and city. Each one is separated into rudimentary, common, and elite. And each of those is further separated into 10 numbered levels. If I want to leave, my village would have to become a town, but even then I would need to check in at least a few times a month. But if I can get to grade 1 elite village, then I can at least move around a 50-kilometer distance around Castlemaine. Right now, I'm stuck at the grade 10 rudimentary village level. If I want to take the next step to become a grade 1 common village, I still need about 100,000 F coins in upgrades. I need to double the size of my current militia from 10 to 20, and they would all need to be level 10. On top of that, I need at least one subsidiary village along with a bunch of other smaller tasks related to favorability and amenities. She listed these things out as a way to make Scylla's back down, but he only nodded. Okay, what about the rest? The rest? Kasari was confused. I don't need you to list out what you need to make it to grade 1 common village. What do you need to make it to grade 1 rudimentary town? Kasari sat in stunned surprise. It was at that moment that there was some shifting at the door and a middle-aged couple accidentally stumbled in. Chapter 320, Matilda Rose. Scylla's and Kasari looked over at the same time. Scylla's reaction was just fine, but Kasari found herself blushing for some reason, and she wasn't even sure why. Geraldine was the first to recover, coughing, smoothing out her dress, and putting on a stern expression. How could you not tell us something like this, Ray? You heard that. Kasari recovered, only to be left aghast. This matter wasn't something that she planned on telling anyone. That included Olivia, who had been with her in this place the longest. Her parents were the last people she wanted to know. All of this was becoming a mess. Truthfully, Scylla's had noticed them at the door a long time ago thanks to his visualization, but he hadn't said anything because they were Kasari's parents. He still didn't understand what a destiny quest really meant, and honestly, he was still grappling with the reality. Scylla's couldn't help but look down at the madness key hanging around his neck. Could it be that this cursed thing was even more beneficial than he knew? If he was correct, then the price for failure of his own stolen destiny quest should have also been death. But the madness key turned it into a punishment of genes instead. Was this a hidden ability of this treasure that he didn't understand before? Geraldine, Paul, Scylla's greeted politely. A large hand slapped down on Scylla's shoulder and shook him around a bit. How many times have I told you to call me UNC or old man, kid? Paul, Kasari's father, was a man with a bright bald spot in the middle of his head, but other than this slight imperfection, one would think that he had spent his life in the military and not behind an office desk. He had the forearms and wrists of a construction worker, the bronzed skin of a bodybuilder on competition day, and he was almost a head taller than Scylla's. Silas himself was at least 6 feet 4, but Paul was almost 7 feet tall without shoes on. The difference between them was quite stark. With his eye, Silas could also tell that Paul would be quite an attractive man if he shaved the rest of his hair off. But for some reason, he insisted on leaving that moat in place. Only a few people knew the reason, and Silas happened to be among them. There was a day a few years back when he had chosen to shave it off and Geraldine went crazy. He still remembered that argument like it was yesterday. The funny part was that she was mad that her husband was too handsome, saying something about annoying secretaries and teenagers looking for sugar daddies. Since then, the man had kept his hair no matter how sparse. The poor guy was even forced to clean shave his beard every day, an action that shaved at least 3 manly points from him. As for his words, Silas didn't know how to respond. He had heard these words before, of course. But every method he used to try and weasel out of it didn't work. Intelligence was useless on shamelessness. He still remembered his first response to this. He had said that Paul wasn't his real uncle, and calling him old man was disrespectful, especially considering he wasn't even that old. Back then, Paul had responded with how they'd be family anyway if he married Kassarai, so he might as well start calling him father-in-law, then. After that day, Silas learned not to try to argue with this man using methods that worked in academia. He would just end up on the losing end. What kind of man just casually sold off the daughter like that? The two of them hadn't even been dating back then. Speaking of which, the way Kassarai's parents learned that they had was another embarrassing story. It wasn't a lewd one, but it was one that made it difficult for Silas to look the man in the eye nonetheless. Silas cleared his throat. The only way to combat shamelessness was with more shamelessness. Have you not been eating, Paul? Your pats seem to have gotten a little weaker. Paul blinked, looking at Silas' shoulder. He tried to shake the kid around like he usually did, but Silas was practically an iron pole. After a while, Paul burst into laughter. This is good, this is good. An old man like me is bound to lose his strength eventually. This way, you can become the head of the household and take care of things while I retire. Silas froze. How had this man turned it around on him again? 2 stifled giggles came from the side and Silas couldn't help but give Kassarai a look. You still haven't answered your mother's question. At this point, it was Kassarai's turn to freeze. You. That's right, Kassarai Matilda Rosehale. How dare you keep this from us? Geraldine went from giggling to an enraged lioness in a matter of moments. As for Paul, he had no choice but to start dealing with this burning fire as well, while Silas took this opportunity to slip away. Silas vanished down the hallway and the amusement in his eyes faded toward coldness. The further he got away from the arguing family, the sharper his aura grew. He wouldn't allow this world to kill those he didn't want dead. Kassarai's plight should all be related to this destiny quest. On her own, she had managed to push Castle Maine to number 1, and considering how hard Silas' own fragmented destiny quest had been, he still had no idea how she had managed to clear her own. She was a fiercely independent woman, but it was to a fault. Right now, he didn't really care what her opinion about it was, he would clear the path ahead. Faintly, Silas began to grasp a deeper understanding of himself. This time, he had accepted this burden without much thought at all. And he didn't particularly care what anyone else thought about it. The fresh air hit him as he walked out of the city lord residence.